When I was a teenager, I was in a church and I was reading the New Testament. And I saw that there was a big difference between what I was reading in the Gospels and what I was seeing in the church. And so today I would like to show you that pattern, and I would like to show it to you from the book of Mark. Now, Yeshua had the miracle of the turning the water into wine. Okay, that was his first miracle. He went up to get baptized by John the Baptist. He went out and got the temptation. He fasted for 40 days, got tempted by the devil, and so forth. And after all of that happened, he went back to Galilee. And in Luke 4:14 through 15, it says, Then Yeshua returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and news of him went out throughout all the surrounding region, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all. Now there was some of the disciples of John were there when Yeshua was baptized, and the Spirit came down on him like a dove, and they saw this, right? And they heard the words of John. John was pointing towards him as the Messiah. And so some of the disciples of John joined him, and then others were seeing these miracles, and he's doing a lot of miracles. But let's get back into Mark. In chapter 1, verse 9 through 11, it came to pass in those days that Yeshua came from Nazareth to Galilee. Okay, so this is the same as the passage in Luke 4. And was baptized by John in the Jordan, and immediately coming up from the water he saw the heavens parting and the Spirit descending on him. Then a voice came from heaven, You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Okay, so now that's going to get the attention of some people, and some of those disciples decided they're going to switch. They're going to go from John to Yeshua, and John encouraged this. Let's drop down in Mark 1 to verse 16 through 20. And as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Then Yeshua said to them, Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men. And they immediately left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little further from there, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were also in the boat mending their nets. And immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and went after him. Now it says they just, picked up and left because he said follow them. It's like, some hypnotizing thing, right? No, these guys had been hearing him speak in the synagogues and doing miracles and all this kind of stuff, and they were ready. Okay, they had already been introduced in some way to Yeshua, and they were ready to make the commitment to become a disciple of his. And when it says follow me, it means walk after me, meaning to become a full-time disciple. Let's jump over to Mark chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. Then he appointed 12 that he might be with him, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have power to heal sickness and to cast out demons. So he's calling people to become his disciple, and at some point he locks down the membership, and he says, these 12 guys are going to be in this class for this year, okay? And so here's where he designates these 12 guys. And the class is for the purpose of making them into apostles that are going to go out and replicate his model and get people and disciple other people. Okay. Then sometime during this time, while he's training his disciples, he's walking around different places and ministering to people during this time while he's discipling these guys during this first year. We get to Mark 5, 1 through 20, and we have a very interesting story about the region of the Gadarenes. Now, the Gadarene region is near a town called Gadara, and it is on the southeast side of the Sea of Galilee. And there are 10 cities in this area which are Roman cities, okay? And this area here is speaking Aramaic, okay? Because it's part of the eastern part of the empire, where it goes off into Syria and Iran, Iraq, all of that area, Mesopotamia. This is connected to that. So it's off on the east side. And here's the story. Mark 5:1. Then they came to the other side of the sea, the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs. No one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Yeshua from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Yeshua, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, that you do not torment me." For he said to him, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." Then he asked him, "What is your name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." So he's talking to the demon that's in this guy, right? Also, he begged him earnestly that he would not send him out of the country. Now, a large herd of swine were feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, "Send us to the swine that we may enter them." And at once Yeshua gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. See, this is a Roman area, and the Romans, of course, ate pigs. They did not eat the biblical diet. This is not an area that is Jewish per se. It's more of a Gentile type of area. A lot of Romans here. Verse 14. So those who fed the swine, and they told it to the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Yeshua and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion sitting and clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region, and when he got into a boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. Well, this is a problem because Yeshua had already locked down the membership. He had 12 guys that he was working with, and he couldn't add any more because he needed a small group so that everyone in the group could participate. If you have a larger group, it turns into a lecture situation rather than a discussion, rather than a sharing situation. This is how our congregations are supposed to operate. We listen to the Spirit and we share what we receive. We discuss the Scripture, okay? We practice the things that we are learning. It's not a lecture type of situation. And so there was no room for him in the class. However, Yeshua did not permit him, okay, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you." And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Yeshua had done for him, and all marveled. So this guy didn't have a place in the class for this year, so instead he went home. Now this guy was demon possessed. He didn't have a home, right? I mean, he had his father's home maybe. So he probably went to his father's home, but he went around to these 10 Roman cities in this region and was proclaiming, witnessing. And that's what happens, when people get touched by God, brand new believers, they have a tendency to go out and witness. They tell people about what happened, okay? And so what happens is that they have a large group of people that are marveling about this, okay? But they don't have anywhere to go. They don't have a group that they can join in with, because that group is the first group, and there's only one group at this time, and so they can't join in with them at this time, so they have to wait until the next year when they're going to have another class open. So let's continue on and see what goes on next. Mark 6:1. Then he went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. Nazareth is on the west side of Galilee, or the Galilee Sea. It's also called Gennesaret Sea. Okay, and verse 7, he called the 12 to himself and began to send them out by two, and gave them power over unclean spirits. So this is where they graduate, and they go out in 6 teams of 2. So they're going to go to 6 different locations, okay, and they're going to set up their own congregations. Verse 45 through 46 in chapter 6 of Mark. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, that's on the northeast side of Galilee, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to a mountain to pray. Okay. Then in verses 53 through 56, he goes to Gennesaret, which is on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. Then in chapter 7, verses 31 through 36. Verse 31, again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, that's over on the coastline, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis. Okay, so he's traveling down south of the Sea of Galilee now, on the eastern side. And then he went from Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. This is the same area where the guy with the demons was. Okay, he was right on the coast near Gadara, or also the area called the Decapolis. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on them. Now, who is this they people. They is people who had heard about Yeshua from this guy. Okay? And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers on his ears, and he spat and he touched his tongue. Then, looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is to be opened. And in other words, he's speaking Aramaic to this person because this person speaks Aramaic in this area. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it, and they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So what we see here, and then later on, if you marry this up to the Luke passage, in Luke 8:37 through 48, that's when he goes and he deals with the demon. In Luke 10, he sends out the 72, and then they were amazed that they had all these things. This is in verses 17 through 20. They were amazed about the authority that they had with the miracles and such. And so what we see here is that probably what happened was that the 6 teams of the disciples went to different cities. They then trained up 6 groups of 12. If you do the math, that comes out to be 72. And when you read, there are some manuscripts of Luke 10 which reads 72 rather than 70. And so if you do the math, that is exactly the 12 teams. So that's what we're seeing, is that these teams of 2 were sent out, and they set up exactly a little group of 12 and trained them for a year, and they sent them out in teams of 2 in Luke 10. And one of those teams apparently went to this Decapolis area, and they were working in this particular area, and set up a group there, or maybe several groups there. But Yeshua had prepped the area by doing these miracles, and so they had this group that was ready to go. They may have met in the home of this guy that had the demons leave, and so he was able to get into a class at that time. But if you do the math, if you got 72, split it up into 2, that is 36 groups of 12. And so that comes out to be hundreds of people, right? And so hundreds of people are being able to get discipled, this concentrated discipling that they're getting. And in this discipling, they are trained not only to just go out and witness like these brand new believers can do, which you can learn in a weekend seminar, but they're also learning how to live righteously, which is that's a big deal, okay? And that's why you have to spend this whole year of training. How do you live righteously? Well, it's impossible for us as humans, but it is possible if we follow Yeshua's discipling path, and we get discipled for that year. We can then live righteously, and as such we can represent God correctly. And if we can represent God correctly, God can endorse us with this kind of miracles that we're talking about here. They could heal the sick, they could raise the dead, they could cast out demons. All of this stuff is the power of God endorsing these people because they are living righteously and representing God correctly. And they can only do that by practicing it for a year in this type of a training course using the path that Yeshua trained them on. And we are learning that path right now. It is written down for us in Paul's letters. And so we're going through that step by step, the same material that Yeshua gave to his disciples to train them to be righteous and to become apostles, go out in teams and set up little groups of their own and do the same thing over and over, multiplying not just witnesses, but righteous people who are actually going to be able to pass the judgment, because the judgment is based on works, right? And that is Romans 2, and that is where the judgment is described in detail, that we have to live righteously in order to pass the judgment. So we don't want to get these people, just witness to them and say that we're done. No, we want to make them into righteous people so that they can actually get eternal life instead of just being promised it and missing the boat with a deception. So, but this is the pattern that we see in the New Testament. And this is the pattern that we need to get back to. We need to get away from the church system, which it's a money system. It is large group. It is lecture. It says that you cannot be righteous. Why? Because they don't have a way of making people righteous. It comes from the Greek system of the temple system, and it's not the pattern that you see in the New Testament. And so this is the pattern that we're looking for. This is the one we want to replicate, and we are in the process right now of trying to figure out how to do this, what are the traditions that we're supposed to be learning? How are we supposed to be setting this thing up? And so if you are interested in this model, then let us know. And we are in the process of trying to figure that out. So, the model of the New Testament from the book of Mark.